TLDR, started a food truck business with no culinary background, struggled in the beginning, learned from my mistakes, found my niche, and now I'm running a successful mobile restaurant, all while balancing family and personal growth. So, I've been running a food truck business for the last 5 years, but the journey here was anything but smooth. I didn't come from a culinary background at all. I was actually in tech, working a typical 9 to 5 job that most people would envy. Decent salary, nice benefits, stability, all that jazz. But I always felt like I was missing something. It wasn't a lack of ambition or a need for more money. I felt like I was losing my passion for what I was doing. I wanted to create something that could really make an impact, something that would leave a mark. I've always had a love for food. Growing up, I spent a lot of time in the kitchen with my mom and grandma. Both of them were excellent cooks, but I never really took it seriously as a career. It was just a hobby, a way to unwind. But over time, I began to notice something. I loved the act of creating, of taking raw ingredients and turning them into something people would enjoy. This feeling kept growing, and before long, the idea of starting a food business started to sound more and more appealing. It wasn't an impulsive decision, though. I thought about it for a while. My wife and I sat down and discussed it multiple times. I was already overworked in my current job, and the idea of taking on something so risky was a bit daunting. But after a lot of late-night talks, we decided to take the plunge. I didn't know where to start. I wasn't a chef, and I certainly wasn't a business expert. So, I started by attending local food truck festivals, talking to vendors, and just absorbing as much as I could. I learned a lot about the logistics, how to set up the truck, what permits were necessary, and how food costs worked. I also began experimenting with recipes in my own kitchen. I wasn't trying to make anything super fancy. I wanted something simple but delicious, something that would stand out. My wife was extremely supportive. She took on the financial side of things, helping me with budgeting and finding investors. We managed to pull together enough to get a used truck, retrofitted for a kitchen. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I'll be honest, the first few months were brutal. I'm talking constant failure. My food wasn't great. The truck broke down several times. And to top it off, we were in a location that wasn't ideal. There was a lack of foot traffic, and we weren't really drawing in the crowd. I thought I was going to lose everything. At the time, I was juggling my full-time job with the truck business. I'd work at my day job, then after hours, I'd head to the truck, making sure everything was prepped and ready for the next day. It was exhausting. Some nights, I didn't even know if I'd make it to the next day. I spent so many nights doubting myself and wondering if I made a mistake. But here's the thing, I didn't give up. I didn't quit because I couldn't bear the thought of looking back and regretting it. I started small, focusing on perfecting a couple of signature dishes that I thought people might like. I even started asking customers for feedback. What did they like? What didn't they like? Slowly, I fine-tuned the menu, and that made a huge difference. One of the key lessons I learned in those early months was the importance of branding. We had a solid product, but we didn't have a solid identity. The name of the truck was forgettable, the logo was basic, and our social media presence was practically non-existent. Once I realized how important it was to create a brand that people could connect with, I got to work. I rebranded the food truck entirely. I spent some time thinking about what would make it stand out in a crowded market. I focused on storytelling, crafting a narrative about the journey I had taken to get the truck started. I talked about my roots and how food had always been a part of my life. I made the logo more vibrant, and I invested time into creating a social media presence. I started interacting with potential customers, posting behind-the-scenes content, and sharing our daily specials. We also changed locations. I found a food truck park that was starting to grow in popularity, and it made all the difference. We went from serving a handful of people a day to consistently having long lines. The food started to taste better, and people noticed. We were slowly building a loyal following. That was the turning point for me. I had a moment where I looked back and realized how far I'd come. Things weren't perfect, far from it, but we were moving in the right direction. The financial strain started to ease as the business picked up, and I found a rhythm. I was working less at my 9 to 5 and spending more time on the truck, refining our menu and operations. My wife and I even hired a couple of people to help out during the busy hours. The success didn't happen overnight. It took years of trial and error. But eventually, the truck became a staple in the community. We started getting regulars who would come by for our specific dishes, and word of mouth spread like wildfire. I started experimenting with new menu items, tweaking recipes, and introducing seasonal specials. People started posting about us on social media, which helped even more. We even collaborated with local breweries, offering food pairings, which brought in a whole new crowd. 5 years later, the business is thriving. We've expanded the truck to 2 locations, and I've had the privilege of hiring a talented team of chefs and front-of-house staff. What's most rewarding, though, is that I've learned so much about myself. I've learned to embrace failure and to use it as fuel. I've learned to pivot when things aren't working. And I've learned that building something meaningful takes time, perseverance, and a whole lot of grit. The road to success wasn't easy, but every step, every challenge was worth it. I'm now able to work full-time on the business, and the idea of going back to a desk job feels like a distant memory. My family is proud of what I've built, and that's more fulfilling than I could have ever imagined. Looking back, I see that all the sleepless nights and hard work paid off, but I also recognize how much more I still have to learn and grow. Sometimes, when things are going well, I think about those early days, about how close I was to quitting. And I'm glad I didn't. Because now, I have a food truck that represents not just a business, but a dream that I didn't give up on. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I'm an entrepreneur who built a business from scratch and stumbled through failure after failure before finding success. I've learned a ton along the way, and I hope sharing my story might give some of you the courage to keep pushing forward or maybe help you avoid the mistakes I made. It's a long road, and it wasn't always pretty, but here it is. I was in my early 20s when I first got the idea. I had always been interested in tech, and back then, it seemed like every successful entrepreneur in Silicon Valley was creating the next big app. So naturally, I thought I could do the same. I didn't have much experience or money, but I was determined. I'd been working in retail since I graduated high school, saving up every penny I could, hoping one day I'd have enough to start something of my own. At first, I thought maybe I could just save a bit more and then take some coding courses to build something cool. In 2015, I finally decided to go all in. I was 24 years old, and I had just enough savings to get started. I put all my money into building a simple mobile app, one that could help people organize their daily tasks. The idea wasn't revolutionary, but it seemed practical. I figured that if I could make something easy to use, people would love it. I hired a freelance developer and built the first version of the app. The whole process was a mess, to be honest. I had no clue how to manage a tech project or how to create a product that people actually wanted. I spent months tweaking things, trying to perfect the user interface and the features, but I was still unsure whether anyone would care. The launch came in late 2015. I poured everything I had into marketing, paying for social media ads, writing blog posts, and reaching out to influencers who could potentially help promote the app. But nothing happened. There was no hype. No one downloaded the app. I was devastated. I remember checking the download numbers constantly, waiting for them to rise, and every time, they were painfully low. I knew deep down that my app was not the game changer I had envisioned. It was just another app in a sea of thousands. I tried to make adjustments. I added new features, rebranded, and changed the design several times. But it was clear I didn't understand my target audience, and I had no real marketing plan. I started spending money on things I thought would help, but just didn't know what I was doing. After a year of struggles, the app was officially a failure. I didn't make any revenue, and I had spent almost all my savings. I could have walked away right there, and part of me wanted to. But for some reason, I couldn't. It wasn't just the money I'd put in. It was the idea that I could do this, that I could build something. I was stubborn and didn't want to accept defeat. So, after taking a few months to lick my wounds, I started a new project. This time, I wanted to learn from my mistakes. I started reading everything I could about entrepreneurship, marketing, and product design. I even joined online communities of other entrepreneurs and asked questions. It was the first time I really realized how much I had to learn. In 2017, I pivoted. I moved away from the idea of building apps and instead focused on a physical product, a sustainable and eco-friendly water bottle. The market seemed to be growing, and I thought I could create a brand around it. I researched everything from materials to manufacturing and started reaching out to suppliers. I also did more thorough market research this time. I wanted to know exactly what people wanted and how much they were willing to pay. Launching the water bottle line was a different experience. I worked with a small factory overseas to keep production costs low, and I set up a basic e-commerce website. This time, I was a little smarter with my marketing. I used social media influencers in the eco-friendly space and started doing giveaways to build an audience. I didn't expect to make millions right away, but after a few months of pushing the brand, I started seeing small, consistent sales. It was a sign that the product was actually resonating with people. By 2018, my business was starting to grow slowly but steadily. I was still working a part-time job to keep money coming in, but I had enough profit from the bottles to reinvest into the business. I hired a small team to help me with fulfillment and customer service, and I started refining our marketing strategy. It wasn't glamorous. Most of my time was spent managing orders, finding new suppliers, or trying to come up with new ways to reach customers. But it was progress, and that felt good. Then came the real test, scaling. By 2019, demand for my product had grown enough that I needed to increase production. The factory I was working with had some limitations, so I started looking for a bigger, more reliable supplier. But this is where things got complicated. The new supplier I found didn't deliver on time. There were issues with quality control, and the shipping was delayed by months. I lost customers, and my reputation started to take a hit. I had to refund a lot of money, and that set us back significantly. The failure with the supplier was a huge blow, and for a moment, I thought about giving up again. But then I remembered the lessons I had learned from my first failure. This time, I had systems in place. I had built relationships with loyal customers, and I had a small team of people who believed in what we were doing. So I fought through the pain, sourced new suppliers, and spent the next 6 months working tirelessly to rebuild our reputation. In 2020, things started turning around. We found a more reliable supplier, our customer base grew, and our online presence took off. I started focusing more on building brand loyalty, offering promotions, and expanding into new markets. We launched new products like reusable straws and eco-friendly lunchboxes, and each new product was met with success. By the time 2021 came around, I had a thriving business that was no longer a side hustle. I was making enough to support myself full-time, and I had finally achieved the dream I'd set out for years ago. We had a small but dedicated team, and our revenue had grown to a level where we could invest back into the company. The road was long, but the satisfaction of seeing my product in stores and getting positive feedback from customers was something I couldn't describe. Looking back, I'm amazed by how far we've come. The early failures were tough, and there were times when I thought it wasn't worth it. But if I had quit after the first failure, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn, grow, and eventually build something that I'm proud of. Entrepreneurship is hard, and it's not a linear path to success. You'll fail, you'll struggle, and you'll want to quit more times than you can count. But if you keep learning, keep improving, and keep pushing forward, you might just find success waiting for you on the other side. So, to anyone out there reading this who is struggling or thinking about giving up, don't. You're closer to where you want to be than you think. Keep going. I always wanted to build something that could last. Something bigger than just me, a business that could impact lives, create opportunities, and, in some small way, make the world better. I was raised in a small town with parents who worked hard but didn't have much. Their lives revolved around the basic essentials, paying bills, providing for the family, and making sure we had food on the table. I didn't grow up with privilege, but I grew up with a sense of responsibility and an unwavering belief that if you worked hard enough, you could carve out your own future. My journey to entrepreneurship wasn't a straight line. It wasn't like one day I woke up and thought, I'm going to build a tech startup, or I'm going to revolutionize an industry. No, it started much humbler than that. It started in a small town, with a small idea, a dream that seemed almost laughable at first. I was in my early 20s, working at a dead-end job in retail, when I had my first entrepreneurial itch. I had saved up a little money from my part-time gig, and, with a bit of borrowed cash from my parents, I decided to try my hand at a small local food delivery service. The idea came from watching people in my community complain about the lack of healthy food options delivered to their doorsteps. I wasn't thinking big. I just thought, maybe I can solve that problem. The idea was simple. Provide healthy meal deliveries for people who didn't want to cook but still wanted to eat well. I figured I could find a few local restaurants, negotiate a deal with them, and hire a couple of drivers to deliver food. What could go wrong, right? Well, plenty. The first challenge was finding a reliable delivery driver. I had no idea how difficult it was to find someone dependable who also cared about the job. The second challenge was managing the logistics of food delivery, especially keeping food warm, ensuring quality control, and navigating the strange intersection of customer service and food preparation. I also hadn't thought through pricing. I figured I could charge a small delivery fee, but then I realized I was losing money on every order. My service was niche, and the customer base was limited. The competition was fierce, and people weren't ready to pay extra for delivery when they could just drive themselves to the restaurant. I ended up folding the business after 6 months, just barely breaking even. At that point, I was devastated. I had put everything into it: my savings, my time, my energy. I had big dreams of quitting my job and running this delivery service full-time. But I had learned the hard way that there's more to business than passion alone. The failure crushed my confidence, and for a while, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to try again. But here's the thing about failure: it's humbling. It stings, but it also teaches you lessons you can't learn in any classroom. I realized that I wasn't focusing enough on what the customers actually wanted, and I wasn't solving the problem deeply enough. The idea wasn't bad, but my execution was flawed. Instead of quitting, I decided to take a step back and analyze what I had done wrong. After a few months of reflection, I went back to the drawing board. I took a sales and marketing course, learned about customer acquisition, and figured out what I could do differently. I also began researching different industries that were ripe for disruption. I wanted to try something different, something bigger than just food delivery. That's when I stumbled upon the world of e-commerce. I was captivated by the idea of reaching customers all over the world. I realized that the potential for growth was enormous, and it didn't rely on the physical limitations of a local market. After months of research, I launched my first online store, a small e-commerce business focused on eco-friendly home products. I started with a few items I sourced from local suppliers, including reusable bags, bamboo toothbrushes, and stainless steel straws. It was a niche market, but the growing awareness around environmental issues gave me confidence that there was room for growth. Building the website wasn't easy. I had no experience in web development, so I taught myself through trial and error. I spent nights learning how to build a site, write product descriptions, and optimize for search engines. The first few months were slow. I spent every waking hour marketing the store, running Facebook ads, and reaching out to influencers who aligned with my brand values. I also focused on building a community around my brand by sharing educational content on sustainability. But even though I was working tirelessly, sales weren't coming in as quickly as I had hoped. The biggest hurdle was customer trust. When you're just starting out, no one knows who you are. It's hard to convince people to buy from a new store, especially when the market is crowded with well-established brands. I learned the hard way that trust is earned, and it takes time. Despite the slow start, I kept pushing. I focused on improving my product offerings and refining my website. I experimented with different advertising channels, and slowly but surely, things started to pick up. Customers who had made a purchase came back for more, and they started recommending my store to their friends. Word of mouth played a huge role in my early success. Then, one day it happened. A viral post on social media pushed my business into the spotlight. A popular influencer in the eco-friendly space shared one of my products, and overnight, my sales skyrocketed. It wasn't just a one-time boost. It was the start of sustained growth. The momentum gave me the confidence to reinvest in my business and hire a small team to help manage the operations. Over the next few years, my business expanded rapidly. I was able to scale up my product range, develop partnerships with larger suppliers, and expand into international markets. The journey wasn't always smooth. There were plenty of setbacks, from supply chain issues to tough competition, but I had learned to navigate the challenges with a clearer head. Looking back, the journey from that small food delivery service to running a successful e-commerce business was a roller coaster. It required resilience, a willingness to learn, and the ability to embrace failure as part of the process. I learned that entrepreneurship isn't just about having a good idea. It's about solving problems, adapting, and continuously evolving. Now, my company is thriving. We have a growing customer base, a dedicated team, and a steady stream of revenue. I often reflect on how far I've come and the lessons I've learned. I'm proud of what I've built, but I know the journey is far from over. Entrepreneurship is a never-ending learning process, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. I hope my story can serve as a reminder to anyone who's thinking of starting their own business. Don't let failure define you. Learn from it, grow from it, and keep moving forward. The road to success is long and winding, but it's worth every step. I've been an entrepreneur for nearly 15 years now, and my journey is one of perseverance, failure, and, surprisingly, a lot of luck. I didn't come from a rich family, nor did I have some kind of mentor guiding me every step of the way. What I had was an idea that I couldn't let go of, a willingness to try, and a hunger to succeed. It all started in my early 20s when I was stuck in a job I hated. I had just graduated from college with a degree in business, but I wasn't living the dream. I was working a 9-to-5 office job that I had convinced myself would help me build a stable career. After a few months, though, I realized I wasn't cut out for the traditional route. The thought of sitting in front of a computer, working on spreadsheets for the next 40 years of my life, felt like prison. One night, as I was scrolling through my phone, I came across an ad for a product that promised to revolutionize home organization. It was one of those trendy products that seemed to be taking over social media. I clicked through to the company's website and immediately thought, I could do this. I knew nothing about product design or manufacturing, but I had an itch to do something outside the box. I started brainstorming how I could improve on the product and bring my own version to market. I thought, if it could work for them, why couldn't it work for me? I spent the next few weeks researching. I looked up everything from manufacturing to shipping costs, trademarks, and how to set up a website. I even bought a course on Amazon FBA, Fulfillment by Amazon, which at the time seemed like the quickest way to test the waters of selling products online. The idea was simple. If I could sell enough of this new product on Amazon, I could build my business slowly without needing massive startup funds. I started small. I found a manufacturer overseas who could make a prototype of my version of the product. After several months of back and forth, I finally received a sample. It was garbage. The materials were cheap, the design was off, and it was nothing like the image I had in my head. I felt defeated but didn't give up. I took the product back to the drawing board. I redesigned it, chose better materials, and after a lot of trial and error, finally got a product that I thought was worthy of selling. Now came the hardest part, getting people to buy it. I spent all my time marketing on social media, using influencers, and even paid for ads. The first few weeks were brutal. I sold maybe 5 units, mostly to friends and family. I could feel my bank account getting thinner and my savings evaporating. I was discouraged, but I refused to quit. Then, something magical happened. A small but influential blogger picked up on my product. She posted a review, and it went viral. The orders came in like a flood, and I had no idea how to keep up. I didn't even have enough inventory to meet the demand. I had to scramble to get more products made, deal with angry customers, and figure out how to scale the business. But the exposure gave me something I had never had before: momentum. As the orders grew, so did my business. I moved from selling exclusively on Amazon to building my own website and expanding to other platforms. I hired a small team of customer service reps, a marketing assistant, and a warehouse manager to help with the growing demand. In the first year, I made just enough to cover my expenses and pay myself a modest salary. I still remember that feeling of relief when I hit my first $100,000 in sales. But here's the thing about entrepreneurship. It's never smooth sailing. The following year, I had to pivot. The market became saturated with similar products, and my sales started to plateau. I had a choice to make: double down and hope for the best, or completely reinvent my brand. I chose the latter. I spent months analyzing what made my product stand out, and I realized that the key was in the customer experience. I started focusing on building a brand, not just selling a product. I worked on creating an emotional connection with my customers. I started producing content around the lifestyle my product represented, showcasing how it could make people's lives easier and more organized. I also offered better customer support, a more generous return policy, and a loyalty program. That was when my business truly took off. Sales surged, and we started to dominate our niche. I began expanding the product line, adding complementary items that made sense. I hired designers to create custom packaging, and we began offering bundles at a discounted rate. The key to success was no longer just having a good product. It was about offering an experience that kept customers coming back. At the same time, I focused on learning more about the business side of things. I hired a financial advisor and a mentor who helped me streamline my operations, manage cash flow, and reduce overhead costs. I made mistakes along the way, lots of them, but each failure taught me something valuable. After 5 years of grinding, I hit a milestone that I'll never forget. My business generated over $5 million in revenue in a single year. It wasn't an overnight success. It was years of hard work, learning from failure, and making smart decisions when it mattered most. That's not the end of the story, though. I've since sold my business. After years of growing and scaling it, I realized I was ready for a new challenge. The process of selling my business was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I had to negotiate with buyers, get the business ready for sale, and make sure I was leaving it in capable hands. When the deal closed, I walked away with enough money to comfortably set myself up for the next chapter of my life. In retrospect, I wouldn't change a thing. The journey was full of ups and downs, but those struggles shaped me into the entrepreneur I am today. It taught me resilience, patience, and the importance of learning from your mistakes. More importantly, it taught me that success in business is a long game. If you're willing to put in the work and adapt to changing circumstances, there's almost no limit to what you can achieve. Now, I'm working on new projects, some in the same industry and others completely different. I've found that entrepreneurship isn't just about the end goal, it's about the journey. The ability to start something from nothing, solve problems, and create value is what makes it all worth it. And if there's one piece of advice I'd give to aspiring entrepreneurs, it's this: keep going. The road won't always be easy, but if you stay committed and keep learning, it will be worth it in the end. I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I never expected it to be the roller coaster ride that it turned out to be. This is the story of how I went from working a 9 to 5 job in a cubicle to running my own business, facing hurdles, making huge mistakes, and eventually finding some success. It all started about 7 years ago. I had just graduated college, eager to dive into the corporate world. Like many fresh grads, I believed that success was just about getting a good job with a stable paycheck. I landed a marketing position at a medium-sized company, and for the first few months, it felt like everything was going well. I had a salary, a nice office, benefits, the dream, right? But as time went on, I began to feel stuck. I wasn't doing anything that excited me. I was running the same campaigns over and over, sending out the same emails, writing the same copy. The corporate structure felt like a box, and I was suffocating in it. My colleagues were all nice people, but no one seemed particularly passionate about the work we were doing. It was clear that the company was more focused on maintaining the status quo than pushing any boundaries. I wanted to create something bigger than a monthly newsletter or a banner ad. One night, after a particularly draining day, I was scrolling through my phone when I stumbled upon an article about a young entrepreneur who had started his own business from the ground up. The article was simple, but it sparked something in me. He didn't have a fancy degree, he didn't start with a massive loan, and he didn't know everything there was to know about business. He just went for it. And it worked. That night, I made a decision. I was going to start my own business. I didn't know exactly what that business would be, but I knew I had to give it a shot. The next few months were filled with late nights of research. I spent hours online reading about business models, growth strategies, and the pitfalls to avoid. I even reached out to a few people who had started their own businesses, hoping to learn from their experiences. I was determined to avoid the mistakes they made, or at least be prepared for them. I had a lot of ideas at first, from starting an online marketing agency to selling handmade furniture. But nothing felt right. I knew I wanted to create something I was genuinely passionate about, something that would make an impact, not just a quick buck. That's when I remembered something from my childhood, a hobby I had forgotten about over the years: woodworking. When I was younger, I spent hours in my garage tinkering with wood. I built birdhouses, small tables, even a treehouse in my backyard. As an adult, I had stopped because I was too busy with work. But when I thought about it, woodworking had always brought me joy. It felt fulfilling. What if I could turn that passion into a business? It wasn't the most conventional choice, but it felt right. So, I began working on my idea. I started small, really small. I began by creating custom wooden signs for people. I posted pictures on Instagram and Facebook, and to my surprise, people started taking notice. I got my first order from a friend of a friend who wanted a personalized sign for her new business. It was a small project, but it was my first real taste of what it felt like to run my own business. I was over the moon. For the next few months, I kept working on my side hustle. I would come home from my 9 to 5 job and head straight to the garage, where I spent hours creating more products. I made signs, furniture, and even some home decor items. As I posted more of my work online, people began reaching out to me. Some wanted custom orders, while others just admired my craftsmanship. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The first major mistake I made was pricing my work too low. I was so eager to get sales that I undervalued my time and effort. I spent hours on each piece, but when I factored in the cost of materials, tools, and the time spent, I wasn't making nearly enough to sustain the business. I didn't realize it at the time, but my prices were simply not sustainable. That's when I started to get serious about learning the business side of things. I read books on pricing, profit margins, and marketing. I reached out to mentors who had experience in small businesses, and I attended local entrepreneur meetups. Slowly but surely, I began to get a better understanding of how to run a business that could actually thrive. As my business grew, so did the challenges. I had to learn how to balance my day job with my side hustle, which was becoming more and more time-consuming. I was working 12 to 14-hour days, often sacrificing my weekends to make sure I could fulfill orders. I also started running into issues with inventory and production. I had no idea how to scale up while maintaining the quality of my work. The learning curve was steep. The biggest challenge came a year in when I had to make a decision. Do I quit my job and take the leap full-time? Or do I keep my business on the side? It wasn't an easy decision. My day job provided stability, benefits, and a regular paycheck, while my business was still growing. It wasn't a sure thing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was my chance to go all in. I decided to quit my job. The first few months after I quit were brutal. I was juggling everything myself: production, customer service, marketing, bookkeeping, you name it. I was constantly stressed, but there was no turning back. I had invested too much time and energy into this business to give up now. Then came the breakthrough. I had been networking with local businesses and artisans, and one day I connected with a local boutique owner who loved my work. She offered to sell my products in her store. This was the break I had been waiting for. Being able to get my products into a physical store meant reaching a whole new customer base. Sales took off, and for the first time, I felt like my business could really succeed. Looking back, I realized that the success I found didn't come overnight. It took years of hard work, sacrifice, and learning from my mistakes. I still make mistakes now, but I've learned to embrace them as part of the process. And while the financial rewards are nice, it's the sense of fulfillment that keeps me going. I'm doing something I love, and I'm building something I can be proud of. I'm now at a point where I can hire a small team, outsource some of the work, and focus more on the creative side of my business. We've expanded beyond just custom woodworking to include home decor, furniture, and even collaborations with other local businesses. The business is growing, but I still feel that same excitement I had when I made my first sign all those years ago. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that entrepreneurship isn't easy, but it's worth it. The road to success is bumpy, but if you're passionate, determined, and willing to learn from your mistakes, you can make it. I never would have believed 7 years ago that I'd be running my own business. But here I am, and I wouldn't change a thing. This is the story of how I turned my small, failed side hustle into a multi-million-dollar business in less than 3 years. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't glamorous, but it taught me more about perseverance, failure, and the value of timing than I ever could have imagined. Grab some popcorn, because it's going to be a ride. So let's rewind to 2019. I was in my late 20s, living in a modest apartment with 2 roommates, working as a junior marketing specialist at a tech startup. The job wasn't bad, but I had this nagging feeling that I wanted to do more with my life. I had this crazy idea that if I could just find a way to combine my interest in technology and my obsession with entrepreneurship, I could build something big. At first, I tried a few side hustles. I dabbled in affiliate marketing, tried dropshipping for a while, and even got into selling digital products like ebooks on Amazon. They all fizzled out. The problem wasn't that I didn't put in the effort. I did. But the market was saturated, and I didn't have a strong understanding of what made a business scalable or sustainable. I was just following the same strategies everyone else was. Then, one night, I came across a niche product idea while scrolling through social media. It wasn't new, but it was something I hadn't seen many people talking about. I'd seen a few small businesses popping up, selling eco-friendly products, and it hit me like a bolt of lightning. What if I could create a brand around eco-friendly gadgets and tools? It wasn't just about being eco-friendly, it was about crafting a lifestyle that felt aspirational. So, I researched the market, talked to a few potential suppliers, and decided to dive in. I launched my first product, a reusable, foldable water bottle. At the time, it wasn't a totally unique idea. There were already several brands out there. but I thought I could differentiate by offering a sleeker, more compact design. I spent a few months working on a minimalist brand identity, got a website built, and began selling directly through Instagram and Facebook ads. Here's where things got interesting. I had zero experience with Facebook ads. Absolutely none. So, I threw a few bucks into it, set up a basic campaign, and let it run. To my surprise, it worked. The ads brought in traffic, and I was getting sales, not a lot, but enough to cover my expenses. It wasn't until I started diving into the metrics and tweaking my ads that things started to really take off. By the end of 2019, I had a modest but consistent flow of orders. My bottle wasn't revolutionary, but it was a part of something bigger. The eco-friendly trend was beginning to snowball, and people were becoming more conscious of their environmental impact. My sales were growing, and I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I could make this thing work full-time. Then, 2020 happened. The pandemic hit, and everything changed. When the lockdown started, I found myself with more free time than I ever imagined. Suddenly, I wasn't commuting to my 9 to 5 job anymore, and my hours were more flexible. I doubled down on my side hustle, working on it during every spare minute I had. The challenge? So was everyone else. The eco-friendly market exploded. People who had never cared about sustainability were now looking for alternatives to single-use plastics. I realized that my product wasn't just competing with other brands, it was competing for the attention of people who were suddenly prioritizing sustainability. I had to differentiate myself even more. I worked tirelessly on improving the customer experience, adding personalized touches to the packaging, creating engaging content for social media, and establishing partnerships with influencers. I also started experimenting with new products like bamboo straws and reusable shopping bags. I learned everything I could about SEO, digital marketing, and how to build a brand that wasn't just selling products, but was part of a lifestyle. Then came the turning point. I had always done everything by myself, sourcing products, handling customer service, managing orders, and running ads. It was a lot of work, and I had my hands full. But as sales grew, I realized that I couldn't keep up with demand. I needed help. In 2021, I made the leap and hired my first employee. It was terrifying. I wasn't sure if the business could sustain another salary, but I knew that if I wanted to grow, I needed to let go of some control. I hired someone to help with customer service and operations, which allowed me to focus more on strategy and growth. I also made a massive investment in inventory. I took out a small business loan to bulk up my stock and secure better deals with suppliers. This was a make-or-break moment. If my products didn't sell, I'd be left with a warehouse full of unsold inventory and a pile of debt. But as the economy continued to shift, the demand for eco-friendly products didn't slow down. In fact, it increased. By mid-2021, my business had tripled in revenue, and I was starting to get some attention from larger retailers. I managed to secure a deal with a major online marketplace, which gave my products even more exposure. The growth was almost overwhelming. I was working 18-hour days, but I was finally starting to see the fruits of my labor. However, not everything went smoothly. In late 2021, we faced a major supply chain issue. The global shipping crisis wreaked havoc on my ability to restock products, and I lost thousands of dollars in revenue during the holiday season. It felt like I was back at square one, but this time I was determined not to let it break me. I shifted my focus to building relationships with local suppliers and diversified my product offerings to reduce risk. By 2022, I had turned the corner. My brand had become synonymous with quality, sustainability, and style. I was running a full-fledged business with a team, and we were scaling faster than I ever thought possible. We were able to launch a subscription service, which further boosted customer loyalty and helped us forecast revenue more accurately. As of 2023, my company hit the seven-figure mark in annual revenue. What started as a small side hustle had turned into a business that supported a team of 20 employees. We were expanding into international markets, and the dream I had back in 2019 was becoming a reality. Looking back, the journey wasn't linear. There were setbacks, failures, and countless sleepless nights. But what I learned is that persistence, learning from mistakes, and having the ability to pivot were the keys to turning my business into something real. So, to anyone out there thinking of starting their own business or side hustle, don't give up after a failure. Keep refining, keep learning, and most importantly, be patient. There will be a lot of moments where you feel like quitting, but those are often the moments right before things start to click. Trust the process, and remember that success often comes when you least expect it. If I can do it, So can you. I've always been the type to go after big dreams, and maybe that's what kept me trying when everything seemed to fall apart. This is the story of how I started a company with just $1,000, got my first product into the hands of thousands of people, and nearly lost it all because of my own ignorance. It all began when I was still in my mid-20s. I just left my dead-end office job in a corporate world that felt like a never-ending cycle of reports, meetings, and long, caffeine-fueled hours. I had no real direction at the time, but I knew I didn't want to spend the next 30 years in front of a computer screen in a tiny cubicle. One day, I just walked out of the office, leaving behind my comfortable salary and benefits. I had no backup plan, no savings, and no guarantee of success. The first few months were rough. I tried a dozen side hustles, online reselling, freelance writing, and even dropshipping. None of them worked. I spent endless hours learning new skills, reading about how to make money online, and watching tutorials that made success seem so easy. But nothing clicked. I was frustrated, tired, and felt like I was on the brink of giving up. The one thing I did learn during this time was that the only real way to make money was by creating something of value that people wanted. That's when I had an epiphany. I'd always been into fitness, and I spent hours a week at the gym. One day, I realized that there was a significant gap in the market. No one was really offering high-quality, affordable fitness gear that didn't look cheap or break after a few uses. I'd used countless gym accessories, but the majority of them were either overpriced or poorly made. What if I could make a product that combined quality with affordability? I started sketching out ideas for my first product, a set of resistance bands that were more durable, portable, and affordable than anything I had seen on the market. I didn't know anything about manufacturing or sourcing products, but I was determined. I spent weeks researching factories, negotiating with suppliers, and learning about materials. I also began putting together a brand, something that felt authentic to the fitness community. I wanted to build a brand that didn't just sell products but also motivated people to live healthier lives. In the beginning, I spent every dollar I had on prototypes and a website. My savings were almost gone by the time I got my first batch of resistance bands. But I wasn't about to let that stop me. I borrowed some money from my parents, which I still haven't told them about, to pay for a small ad campaign on social media. I didn't have the luxury of professional marketing, so I used my own voice and stories to connect with potential customers. I wrote blog posts, posted fitness tips on Instagram, and started reaching out to influencers, anything to get the word out about my new product. For the first couple of weeks, nothing happened. My website barely had any traffic, and the few visitors who did come weren't buying. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the empty orders sheet, feeling like I'd just wasted months of my life. But instead of giving up, I doubled down. I learned more about digital marketing, and I tested new ad strategies. I also focused on improving my website and customer experience. Slowly, I started seeing traction. People were buying my resistance bands, and they were leaving glowing reviews. But that's when the next problem arose. My supplier couldn't keep up with demand. I had sold through my initial inventory in just a few weeks, and I had no idea how I was going to restock. I wasn't a logistics expert, and I quickly found myself overwhelmed with the supply chain side of things. I had to scramble to find new manufacturers and figure out how to handle shipping and fulfillment. The learning curve was steep, and at one point, I thought I might not be able to make it work. After months of hustling, I finally got things back on track. I secured a steady supply of product and found a reliable fulfillment partner. By then, the word had spread about my brand, and I had a loyal customer base. I reinvested every penny I made back into the business, improving the quality of my products, expanding my range, and hiring a small team to help with customer support and marketing. But there was one more lesson I had to learn. One night, I received an email from a lawyer's office. It turned out that a larger fitness company had trademarked the name of my brand. I was in violation, and they were threatening legal action unless I changed my company's name and rebranded everything. I was absolutely crushed. After everything I'd been through, this was a blow I wasn't sure I could recover from. I had to make a tough decision. Instead of sinking into defeat, I decided to rebrand completely and come up with an even better name and identity. I hired a designer to come up with a fresh logo, revamped my website, and launched a new marketing campaign. The process was expensive and time-consuming, but in the end, it worked. The rebrand actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It forced me to refine my message and make my brand stronger and more distinctive. The new name resonated with customers even more, and my sales started growing again. Years passed, and my company continued to expand. We eventually launched a full line of fitness accessories, and our products were carried in major retail stores. I started getting calls from investors who wanted to back my company, but by that time, I was already making enough money to fund the growth myself. I was proud of the fact that I'd built something from scratch, with no investors or outside help. Looking back, there were so many moments where I could have given up. Every time I thought I'd hit rock bottom, there was always another mountain to climb. I learned how to turn failure into a lesson and how to keep pushing even when everything felt impossible. Now, my business is thriving, and I'm proud of the journey it took to get here. I still remember those early days, sleeping on the floor of my office, eating ramen for dinner, and wondering if I would ever make it. But I kept going, and that persistence paid off. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, know that the road is never easy. There will be times when you feel like quitting, when everything seems stacked against you, but it's in those moments that your true growth happens. Trust in the process, believe in yourself, and don't be afraid to take risks. You'll figure it out, even when it feels impossible. Because if I can do it, anyone can. I never thought I would be a successful entrepreneur. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I probably would have laughed at the thought. My life was in a state of chaos, and entrepreneurship was the furthest thing from my mind. But sometimes, life takes you on an unexpected journey, and if you're willing to ride the waves, you might find yourself in a place you never thought possible. This is the story of how I turned my life around and built a successful business from nothing. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. My parents were hardworking, but we never had much money. My dad worked as a mechanic, and my mom was a teacher at the local school. We lived in a modest house, and I always had to share a room with my older brother. It wasn't a bad childhood, but it was a simple one. I wasn't the kind of kid who dreamed of starting a company or making millions. Instead, I was focused on just getting by. After high school, I enrolled in college, but my academic performance was lackluster at best. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life, and I wasn't passionate about anything in particular. I dropped out after 2 years, unsure of what my next move should be. I bounced around from job to job, working as a waiter, a construction laborer, and even in retail. The pay was low, and the hours were long, but I never gave up on the idea that I was meant for something more. I just didn't know what that something was. It wasn't until I turned 27 that I had an epiphany. I was working as a cashier at a local grocery store, and one day, I had a conversation with a customer that would change everything. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, and we got to talking about life. I had always been the type to engage with people, and he seemed like someone who had seen a lot in his time. During the conversation, he casually mentioned that he had started several businesses throughout his life, some successful, some not. The way he spoke about it, though, made me realize that success wasn't some magical thing that only happened to a select few. It was a skill, a craft that could be learned and honed. That conversation stuck with me for weeks. I started researching entrepreneurship in my spare time, reading books, watching videos, and listening to podcasts. I knew that I had no experience or knowledge about starting a business, but I was determined to learn. I realized that if I wanted to change my life, I had to take the first step. So, I decided to take a risk, something I had never done before. I saved up a small amount of money, about $20,000, and started brainstorming ideas for a business. I knew I didn't want to follow the typical get-rich-quick scheme that a lot of people seem to chase. Instead, I wanted to build something that would be sustainable and meaningful. After months of research, I decided to start an online store selling eco-friendly products. I had always been passionate about environmental sustainability, and I figured that with the right niche, I could create a business that aligned with my values. At first, things were rough. I had no experience with e-commerce, no knowledge of digital marketing, and no clue how to source products. I spent countless hours learning about website development, SEO, social media marketing, and product sourcing. I used the $20,000 to purchase a basic website template and a small inventory of eco-friendly items. My first product was bamboo toothbrushes, and I was so excited to start selling them. I had no idea how to set up an online store properly, so I spent days tinkering with the site, hoping it would somehow work. The first month was a disaster. I barely made any sales, and I was hemorrhaging money on ads that weren't bringing in any results. I felt like I had made a huge mistake, but I refused to quit. I began reaching out to other entrepreneurs and asking for advice. Some people were kind enough to share their experiences with me, while others were more focused on their own businesses. But the best advice I received was from a fellow entrepreneur who told me, "Don't be afraid to fail. Every failure is just a lesson. Keep learning and pivot when you need to." That advice became my mantra. I kept learning, adapting, and testing new strategies. I started experimenting with different products, improving my website, and refining my marketing techniques. Slowly but surely, my sales began to grow. But the real turning point came when I decided to leverage social media to promote my brand. I had always been a fan of Instagram, and I realized that it could be a powerful tool for building a community around my business. I started posting daily, sharing tips about sustainability, showcasing the products I was selling, and engaging with followers. I didn't have a huge following at first, but the people who did follow me were genuinely interested in what I had to say. I made a point of responding to every comment and message, and soon, I started gaining traction. People began tagging their friends in my posts, and before I knew it, my Instagram following had grown to over 10,000 in just a few months. That's when things really started to take off. Sales increased significantly as my brand gained visibility. I was still working part-time at the grocery store, but I was now making enough money from my business to cover my bills. Eventually, I reached a point where I could quit my job and focus on my business full-time. It was a nerve-wracking decision, but I knew it was the right one. I poured every ounce of energy into my business, constantly working to improve and scale it. I hired a small team to help with customer service, marketing, and logistics, and together, we managed to take the company to new heights. Within 2 years, my online store was generating over $500,000 in annual revenue. The business was profitable, and I had learned so much along the way. But the most rewarding part was the sense of fulfillment I felt every day. I had built something from the ground up, and it wasn't just about the money, it was about creating a company that aligned with my values and helped make a positive impact on the environment. Looking back, I'm still amazed at how far I've come. From a cashier with no experience in business to the owner of a thriving e-commerce company, it feels surreal. I still encounter challenges, of course. There are always bumps in the road, but I've learned to embrace them as part of the process. The key to success, I've realized, isn't about having a perfect plan. It's about being willing to take risks, learn from your mistakes, and keep moving forward no matter what. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this. If I can do it, you can too. It doesn't matter where you start or how little you have. What matters is the willingness to take that first step and keep pushing forward, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Entrepreneurship is hard, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And if you stay committed, you might just surprise yourself with what you can achieve. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I never imagined I would go from barely scraping by to building a business that would change my life, but it all started with a single idea. Let me take you through how I built my business from the ground up and turned my side hustle into something I could never have dreamed of. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and nothing much changes. My parents were hardworking but weren't well off. They taught me the value of a dollar and the importance of self-reliance. Despite this, I was never particularly good at school. In fact, I struggled with grades and often found myself feeling out of place. What I was good at, though, was thinking outside the box. While other kids in my class were dreaming about getting into college, I was busy building things. Whether it was a website or small digital projects, I spent my spare time in front of a computer, tinkering and learning about technology. But it wasn't until I left for college that things started to fall into place. At first, I struggled. College was a whole new world. I was far from home, overwhelmed by the academic workload, and without a clear direction. I had started a degree in engineering, thinking it would lead to something stable and respectable, but I found myself losing interest fast. The idea of sitting in a cubicle doing repetitive tasks for the next 40 years didn't excite me. That was the moment I started asking myself, what do I really want to do with my life? I took a step back and thought about the things I loved. I remembered my passion for creating things. I remembered how I used to design websites as a kid, how I had developed a knack for digital marketing without even realizing it. It was then that I realized, why not start a business around something I love doing? But let me tell you, it wasn't easy. I was broke, living on instant noodles, and drowning in student loans. I had no network, no real business experience, and no clue where to start. I knew I wanted to build a business around digital services, specifically helping small businesses establish their online presence, but I didn't have any clients. At first, I tried everything I could think of to make a quick buck. I tried freelancing on platforms like Upwork and Fiverr. I did web design, social media management, and even some basic SEO work. To be honest, I didn't make much money in the beginning. It was tough, especially with the constant stream of rejection emails and the clients who either never paid or demanded more work than what they had initially agreed to. But then something changed. I decided to take a different approach. I started offering free consultations. Instead of pitching my services to anyone who would listen, I reached out to small local businesses, many of them family-owned, and offered to help them for free. I wasn't trying to make money at first. I was building trust. I knew that if I could show these small business owners what I could do, they would eventually pay for my services. To my surprise, a few businesses took me up on my offer. I helped a local coffee shop improve their website, a fitness studio improve their social media presence, and a small bookstore optimize their online store. The results were immediate. Traffic to their websites increased, their social media engagement went through the roof, and most importantly, they were getting more customers. Word began to spread. That was when I realized something crucial. People don't care about the fancy technical details. They want results. If you can show them how your services can help them make more money, they're willing to pay for it. I started charging clients, but I didn't raise my prices right away. I still had a lot to learn, and I didn't want to scare people away. But slowly, I got better at my craft. I learned more about the technical side of digital marketing and web development, and I started scaling my services. I hired a few freelancers to help with overflow work, and I began offering packages for different types of businesses. My breakthrough came when I landed a contract with a local restaurant chain. They had a small but loyal customer base, but they were struggling to attract new customers. I spent weeks developing a comprehensive digital marketing strategy for them, which included a website overhaul, social media advertising, email campaigns, and local SEO. After the first month, they saw a 25% increase in foot traffic. The next month, it was 40%. I knew then that I was onto something big. That success gave me the confidence to really invest in my business. I spent money on a professional website, invested in marketing, and started building a team. I wasn't just a freelancer anymore. I was a business owner. But that didn't mean it was smooth sailing from there. In fact, I hit a huge obstacle that almost made me quit. I was scaling too quickly. I had taken on more clients than I could handle, and my team was struggling to keep up. Projects started falling behind, deadlines were missed, and clients started getting frustrated. One client threatened to sue me over missed deliverables, and another one flat out dropped me. I realized I had been so focused on growth that I had neglected the very thing that got me here, quality. That was a wake-up call. I realized I had to slow down and focus on the foundations. I took a step back, reassessed my workflow, and began refining my processes. I implemented systems for managing projects and hired a project manager to help with client communications. I also set stricter boundaries with clients and only took on projects that I knew we could handle. It took some time, but eventually the chaos settled, and I was able to create a sustainable business model. Fast forward to today, and I run a successful digital marketing agency. I've expanded to serving clients nationwide, and I now have a team of 15 talented individuals. We specialize in helping small to medium-sized businesses thrive in the digital age. Our services range from web development to SEO and social media marketing. The growth has been steady, and I've learned invaluable lessons along the way. I'm not a millionaire yet, and I still face challenges every day. But I'm doing what I love. I'm my own boss, and I'm helping other businesses grow. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but if you have the determination and are willing to put in the work, anything is possible. Looking back, I never could have imagined where I'd be today. I started with nothing but an idea and the willingness to work hard. If you're sitting on the fence, wondering if you should take the leap into entrepreneurship, my advice is simple: do it. It's not going to be easy, but if you stick with it, you'll build something that's uniquely yours. And that's worth every struggle along the way. This is the story of how I went from a broke college graduate to owning a successful business in just a few years. It wasn't an easy journey, and it wasn't some overnight success, but it's been worth every bit of struggle. If you're someone who's ever felt stuck or unsure about whether it's even possible to make your dreams a reality, I hope my story helps you realize that persistence can truly pay off. I graduated from college with a degree in marketing, and to be honest, I didn't have a clear vision of where I wanted to go. I figured I'd land a job at some marketing agency or maybe work in social media. But as I started applying, I realized something. Every job I wanted required experience. How was I supposed to get experience if I couldn't get a job in the first place? It felt like a catch-22. I spent the first few months after graduation doing the usual job hunt grind, sending out countless resumes, going to interviews that led nowhere, and feeling more and more defeated. I was living with my parents because I couldn't afford rent, and my student loans were starting to feel like a ticking time bomb. I remember thinking, I worked so hard for this degree, but what good is it if I can't even get my foot in the door? One day, while scrolling through LinkedIn, I stumbled across a post by a guy who was talking about how he built a successful business selling custom products online. It wasn't anything too fancy, just a small e-commerce operation where he sold personalized items like t-shirts, mugs, and phone cases. But the post struck a chord with me. He wasn't some tech genius or some rich kid with a trust fund. He was just a regular guy who had worked hard and found a niche. That moment sparked something inside of me. I started researching e-commerce, watching YouTube videos, reading blog posts, and listening to podcasts. I realized that this could be my way out of the endless cycle of job rejection and feeling stuck. But there was one big problem. I had no money to start. I wasn't going to get any investors, and I wasn't about to ask my parents for cash to fund a dream that wasn't even a sure thing. So, I had to get creative. I took a part-time job as a barista at a local coffee shop, not because I loved coffee, I actually didn't, but because I knew I could make a steady income while I worked on building something on the side. I used that money to slowly build up a small savings fund. In the meantime, I started learning everything I could about the business side of things. The first step was deciding what I wanted to sell. I didn't have a unique product idea, but I knew I could carve out a niche. After a lot of thought and brainstorming, I decided to start with custom-designed phone cases. At the time, it seemed like a saturated market, but I saw an opportunity in personalizing them with funny quotes, quirky designs, and pop culture references. It was simple, but I thought it could stand out. I researched suppliers, found a print-on-demand service that could handle production and shipping, and set up an online store on Shopify. The hardest part was designing the products. I had no graphic design skills, so I used a free design tool and started creating simple designs. They weren't anything spectacular, but they were good enough to get started. I launched my store, and to my surprise, I actually made my first sale within a week. It wasn't a big order or anything, but it was enough to give me the confidence that I was on the right track. I kept putting in hours after my shifts at the coffee shop, running Facebook ads, tweaking the website, and refining my designs. As the weeks went by, I started getting more sales. But then came the first real challenge, dealing with customer complaints. Some of my early customers weren't happy with the quality of the phone cases, and there was one instance where a design was completely misprinted. I felt crushed. I was barely making enough to cover my bills, and now I had to deal with upset customers. I wanted to quit so many times, but I kept reminding myself of how hard I worked to get here. I couldn't let this one setback define me. I contacted the print-on-demand supplier and worked with them to resolve the issues. I learned how to handle customer service better, how to manage returns, and how to communicate with people in a way that made them feel heard. That process made me realize how important customer experience was, and it's something I carried with me throughout the business journey. After a few months of struggling, things started to click. I learned how to better target my ads, and I began collaborating with social media influencers who had a similar niche. My designs got better as I refined my skills, and my store started gaining traction. I was still working at the coffee shop, but my business was finally starting to generate enough revenue that I could justify putting more time into it. Fast forward to a year after launching my store, and things were looking up. I had built a loyal customer base, and my sales were steadily increasing. I was still working part-time, but I was beginning to see the potential of turning this into a full-time job. By that time, I had saved up enough to quit my barista job and focus solely on growing my business. But with growth came new challenges. Managing inventory, customer service, marketing, and everything else became overwhelming. I couldn't do it all on my own anymore, so I hired my first employee, someone who could help with customer support. It was a scary decision, as I was still worried about making enough money to cover the new costs, but it was necessary for scaling. A couple of years into my business, I had expanded my product line to include other custom items like mugs, t-shirts, and even custom pet accessories. I had built a small team of 4 people, and we were now processing hundreds of orders every week. I couldn't believe how far I had come from those early days of self-doubt and uncertainty. I wasn't a millionaire, but I was making a living doing something I loved, and that was worth more than any paycheck from a corporate job. Looking back, I realized there were so many times I could have quit. So many nights when I felt like giving up, when the challenges seemed too much to handle. But the key was never to stop. I kept learning, adjusting, and pushing through. Every failure taught me something new, and every setback made me stronger. So if you're out there feeling like you're stuck or questioning whether it's even worth it to start something from scratch, my advice is this: keep going. You won't have all the answers right away, and there will be plenty of tough days. But if you stick with it and learn along the way, you can build something meaningful. Success doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen for those who keep pushing, no matter how difficult it gets. Now, I look back at the small, personalized phone cases that I started with, and I can't help but smile. That was the first step towards something bigger, and that's all you need. Just the first step. If you've got an idea and the drive to make it happen, you're already on your way. I want to share my entrepreneurial journey with all of you. It's been a long, bumpy road filled with ups and downs, and there are lessons I've learned that I think might resonate with some of you who are either in the middle of your journey or thinking about starting your own business. I'm not the typical entrepreneur that grew up with a clear vision of being my own boss or having some grand plan. My story starts when I was in my early 20s, just finishing college. Like many of us, I had no clue what I wanted to do. I had a degree in something vague, communications, and had worked a couple of internships during school, but nothing really sparked that fire for me. I got a regular office job right out of college, working as a marketing assistant for a small company. The work wasn't bad, but it didn't make me feel alive. I'd show up, do my job, and go home. I started to feel like I wasn't contributing to anything meaningful. Over time, I realized that the office environment was starting to drain me. I'd stare at the clock for hours, and the thought of spending the next 40 years doing this made my stomach turn. That's when I knew something had to change, but I had no idea where to start. I started reading books about entrepreneurship and business, listening to podcasts, and watching YouTube videos of successful business owners talking about how they started from scratch. I was both inspired and intimidated. The more I learned, the more I realized how much I didn't know. But there was one thing that kept coming up in every story: starting small. Every successful entrepreneur had started with something small, something they were passionate about. One night, after a few beers with some friends, I jokingly said, "What if I just started selling something online? Like, how hard could it be?" Of course, my friends laughed and shrugged it off. But that thought kept lingering in my mind. Over the next few days, I started doing research on online businesses, specifically e-commerce. I discovered dropshipping, and for the first time, I thought maybe this was something I could try. For those who don't know, dropshipping is when you sell products through your website, but the supplier ships the product directly to the customer. This means you don't need to buy inventory up front. It seemed like the perfect entry point for someone with no capital, no experience, and no clue how to manage an actual business. I spent the next few weeks obsessively learning everything I could about dropshipping, from choosing a niche to building an online store. I watched videos, read blog posts, and joined online communities of people who were already doing it. I figured I would sell something small and manageable, so I decided on phone accessories. They were lightweight, cheap, and popular, and I could easily find suppliers who would ship them directly to customers. I set up an online store through Shopify, which was pretty easy and affordable to use, and I began setting up the product listings. Then, reality hit. I had spent weeks setting everything up, and when I launched the site, I waited for sales. And waited. And waited. It was like crickets. No orders, no signups, nothing. I realized that creating the website wasn't even half the battle. Now I had to figure out how to drive traffic. I had heard about Facebook ads being a great way to drive traffic to an online store, so I threw myself into learning about paid advertising. I set up a Facebook campaign with a modest budget of $10 a day, hoping that would bring in customers. Spoiler, it didn't. At this point, I was burning through my savings and felt like I was hitting a wall. Every time I thought I was on the right path, something new would go wrong. Facebook ads weren't converting, my website wasn't getting traffic, and I had no idea how to turn things around. I remember having panic attacks about how much money I was losing. I'd check my bank account, and every day felt like I was sinking deeper into debt. But here's where things took a turn. One night, after a particularly stressful day, I decided to take a break and started browsing through Reddit's /entrepreneur subreddit. I read about other people who had faced similar struggles and felt comforted by the fact that I wasn't alone. There were threads from people who'd failed multiple times before finding success, and that gave me hope. I learned that failure wasn't the end. It was just part of the process. The next day, I decided to try a new approach. I began focusing less on paid ads and more on organic traffic. I started building an Instagram account and posting consistently about phone accessories. I used hashtags, followed influencers, and tried to engage with as many people as possible. Slowly, I began getting followers, and my engagement started to improve. It wasn't much, but it was progress. I realized that if I could build an audience first, I wouldn't need to spend so much on ads to get people to visit my site. A couple of months went by, and the sales started trickling in. It wasn't a flood of orders, but it was something. I remember my first real sale. It was one of those moments where I almost cried. I couldn't believe someone actually bought something from me. I'd gotten over the first major hurdle, validation. It wasn't much, but it was proof that the business could work. From there, I kept improving my marketing strategy. I learned how to use email marketing to nurture leads, created better product descriptions, and fine-tuned my ads. I found ways to upsell customers and introduce new products. Each step felt like a mini victory, and I could see my profits slowly growing. Within a year, I had built my store into a six-figure business. I was finally able to quit my day job, and while I was far from being financially free, I was doing something I actually cared about. But the story doesn't end there. It wasn't long before I realized that the products I was selling weren't fulfilling me anymore. I wanted something more. I began to rethink my business and focus on something that I felt aligned with my values. Eventually, I pivoted my business into something more niche, a sustainable and eco-friendly brand. I still use the skills I learned in e-commerce, but now I'm proud of the products I'm selling, knowing they have a positive impact on the planet. Today, my business is growing at a steady pace. It's still a grind, but I'm grateful for where I am. I've learned to embrace failure as part of the journey. I've learned that being an entrepreneur is a constant process of reinvention. The road hasn't been smooth, but I've never felt more alive. If there's one thing I want to say to anyone out there thinking about starting a business, it's this: don't expect it to be easy. There will be times when you want to quit, and that's okay. The important thing is to keep pushing forward. Start small, learn as much as you can, and take it one step at a time. And most importantly, be prepared to fail. It's through those failures that you'll learn the most and grow. The success will come, but only if you don't give up. So, if you're on the fence about starting your own business, take it from someone who's been through it. You can do it. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. This is the story of how I turned a $500 investment into a six-figure business and what I learned along the way. I'll try to keep it as real as possible, with all the ups and downs, and without sugarcoating things. If you're looking for a story about overnight success, this probably isn't for you. But if you want to know how hard work, persistence, and a little bit of luck can change everything, then keep reading. About 5 years ago, I was working a dead-end job in retail. I had a college degree, but I was stuck in a low-paying, unfulfilling position that barely covered my bills. I had big dreams, but no clear path to get there. I often found myself scrolling through Reddit and looking at success stories of people who had turned their side hustles into thriving businesses, and I'd wonder if that could ever happen to me. But I never took the leap. Then, one day, I was sitting in my car during lunch break when I saw a local ad for a product I had never heard of before, a smart water bottle that tracked hydration. At first, I laughed it off. It seemed like a gimmick. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't a bad idea. People are obsessed with fitness and health these days, and hydration is a big part of that. So I decided to do some research. I spent the next couple of days obsessing over this concept. I scoured Amazon, looking for similar products, trying to understand the market. I saw that there were a few out there, but none of them seemed to stand out. There were some that were too expensive, some that didn't look good, and some that didn't even work well. I saw a gap, and that's when the light bulb went off. What if I could create a smart water bottle that was affordable, functional, and stylish? I could make it something people would actually want to buy. The first obstacle was money. I didn't have thousands to pour into this idea. I had around $500 saved up, and that was it. I thought about how I could make this work with a small budget. I started by reaching out to manufacturers overseas to see what it would cost to make a prototype. After weeks of emailing and negotiating, I found a company that could produce a small batch of bottles for an affordable price. I wasn't sure if this would even work, but I figured, what's the worst that could happen? I spent every dollar I had on the prototype. It wasn't a huge investment, but it felt like a lot to me at the time. I received the first batch of bottles a few months later, and they looked great. They weren't perfect, but they were functional, and that was enough to get started. The next step was creating a website. I wasn't a web designer, but I was determined to figure it out. I used a simple platform to create a clean and functional e-commerce site, and I listed my water bottles for sale. The next few months were brutal. I didn't make a single sale. Not one. I was spending money on ads, trying to get the word out, but it felt like I was screaming into the void. I started to second-guess myself. Maybe it wasn't such a great idea after all. Maybe no one cared about a smart water bottle. But I didn't give up. I kept tweaking the website, adjusting my marketing strategy, and learning from my mistakes. Slowly, very slowly, I started to get some traction. One of the things that helped me stand out was my social media presence. I didn't have a huge following, but I started posting consistently about health and hydration. I shared tips on how to stay hydrated, the benefits of drinking more water, and how my product could help people stay on track. I also reached out to influencers in the fitness space and asked if they would be interested in reviewing my product. Some said yes, some said no, but the ones who said yes made all the difference. When a well-known fitness influencer posted about my bottle, it gave me the credibility I needed to start gaining real attention. Around the 6-month mark, I had my first sale, then another, and another. By the end of the year, I had sold a few hundred bottles. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to validate the idea. I used that money to reinvest in my business, improve the product, and refine my marketing. Things were starting to snowball. Over the next year, I expanded my product line. I introduced new colors, upgraded the features of the bottles, and added a few accessories. I also started offering bundles, where customers could get multiple bottles or even a hydration tracker to go along with the bottle. I wasn't just selling a product anymore. I was selling a lifestyle. The more I leaned into this idea, the more my brand took off. By the second year, I had reached a point where I could quit my day job. The income from my business had surpassed what I was making at my retail job, and it was only going up. But that didn't mean things were easy. I had to hire employees, manage inventory, deal with customer complaints, and handle all the behind-the-scenes work. There were months when I thought everything was going to collapse under the weight of it all. But I kept pushing forward. Fast forward to today, and my business is thriving. We've expanded beyond just the smart water bottles, and now we offer a full range of hydration-related products, from reusable straws to fitness trackers. We've moved into bigger warehouses, and I've hired a team of people who are just as passionate about the brand as I am. Our products are sold all over the world, and we've even gotten into retail stores. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. That $500 investment was the best decision I ever made. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. I've had failures, I've lost money, and I've made countless mistakes along the way. But I've learned from every one of them. The biggest lesson I've learned is that success doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without sacrifice. You've got to be willing to put in the work, make the tough decisions, and stay consistent, even when it feels like nothing is working. So, if you're sitting there right now, wondering if your idea could turn into something big, my advice is simple: just start. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect product. Take that first step, even if it's small, and learn as you go. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, but keep going. Success is a long journey, but it's one that's absolutely worth it. I've always had a passion for tech, but I didn't realize it would turn into a career until much later in life. I grew up in a small town, where the idea of starting a business felt like a far-off dream. Everyone I knew had a regular 9-to-5 job, and that's what I was expected to do too. But I was always different. I was the kid who tinkered with computers and disassembled gadgets just to figure out how they worked. My classmates were more interested in sports or hanging out, while I would spend hours reading tech magazines, trying to learn coding, and learning about the giants of the tech world: Apple, Google, and Microsoft. My first job out of high school was as a tech support assistant at a local computer repair shop. It wasn't glamorous work, but I learned a lot. It was there that I realized how many people were struggling with their technology but didn't know where to turn. I'd get phone calls all day from people asking for help with everything from software issues to hardware malfunctions, and most of them had no clue how to even describe what was wrong. What stood out to me the most was the lack of accessible resources for these people. Sure, there were forums and help websites, but they weren't tailored to the average person. They required a certain level of technical knowledge that not everyone had. I didn't have a business background, and I didn't know the first thing about starting a company. But I had an idea. What if I could create a platform where people could get real-time help with their tech problems without needing to be tech-savvy? A place where anyone could ask a question and someone could walk them through the solution step by step. At the time, there were similar websites, but none of them felt user-friendly. They were full of jargon and complicated instructions, often leaving users more confused than when they started. So, I began sketching out an idea. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple website where people could submit their tech problems and experts would respond with easy-to-follow instructions. I didn't have a ton of savings, and I wasn't willing to risk everything on a pipe dream, so I started small. I took what little savings I had and hired a freelance web developer to build the website. I didn't even know what a wireframe was at the time, but I knew that if I wanted this to work, I needed a professional to bring my idea to life. The developer built the website, and I called it Tech Help Now. It was bare bones, but it worked. I created an account on every tech forum and social media site I could find and began sharing my platform with anyone who might need it. I offered a free trial period, hoping to attract a few early users who could help me iron out any issues. At first, the response was minimal. I didn't have any marketing budget to speak of, and the people who found the site were mostly those who had already tried everything else. But I kept pushing, making minor improvements to the site as I learned more about what users wanted. The breakthrough came when one day, I got a message from a well-known tech influencer. She had found my site and loved the concept, but she felt it needed more structure. I was ecstatic. This was the break I needed. She was willing to share my platform with her audience, but only if I could improve the site's interface and make it more intuitive. I immediately took her feedback to heart and hired a new designer to help me overhaul the website. The redesign made all the difference. The site looked cleaner, more professional, and easier to navigate. It was now clear that the platform was something worth using. Shortly after the redesign, the influencer made a post on her blog about Tech Help Now. It was a game changer. Suddenly, I was getting hundreds of new users every day. People were signing up for accounts, posting questions, and, most importantly, returning for more help. At that point, I realized that I needed to scale quickly or I risked losing this momentum. I hired a small team of customer support agents and a few tech experts who could help with the more complex questions. As the platform grew, I faced a new set of challenges. The tech experts I hired needed to be vetted, and I needed a way to ensure that the quality of responses remained high. I implemented a rating system for users, where they could rate the help they received, and created guidelines to ensure that answers were clear and helpful. This helped build trust in the platform, and over time, the site became a go-to resource for people struggling with tech issues. I also began to experiment with monetization. Originally, the platform had been free, but I needed a sustainable way to support the growing user base. I introduced a tiered subscription system where users could pay for premium features, like faster response times or personalized one-on-one support. The premium features were a hit, and the revenue started rolling in. At the same time, I kept the basic features free so that anyone could still access help, regardless of their financial situation. Eventually, Tech Help Now became a household name in the tech world. People trusted us to solve their problems, and our community of experts grew into a tight-knit, supportive group. I expanded the platform to include video tutorials and live chat features, making it even easier for people to get the help they needed. We even started offering corporate training programs for businesses that wanted to improve their employees' tech skills. Looking back, I never imagined that my small idea would turn into a full-fledged business. There were so many times in the early days when I thought about quitting, when the site wasn't getting enough traffic or when the feedback was less than positive. But I stuck with it, even when it felt like the odds were against me. If there's one thing I learned throughout this journey, it's that success doesn't come overnight. It takes persistence, adaptation, and a willingness to learn from your mistakes. Today, Tech Help Now is a multi-million-dollar company, and I'm still amazed by how far we've come. I've had the opportunity to speak at conferences, share my story with others, and even mentor other entrepreneurs who are starting their own businesses. But no matter how successful we've become, I never forget where we started. I remember the long nights spent coding the website, the frustration of trying to get our first customers, and the joy of seeing our first review come in. In the end, it wasn't just about building a business. It was about creating something that made a difference in people's lives. I've heard countless stories from users who were able to fix their computers, learn new tech skills, or even launch their own tech projects. All thanks to the support they received on Tech Help Now. That's the part of the journey that keeps me going. So, to anyone out there who's thinking about starting their own business, my advice is simple. Start small, stay persistent, and never stop learning. The road will be tough, but it's worth it. You never know where your passion might take you. I've been thinking a lot about how I got to where I am today, and I feel like sharing the story might help someone out there. This isn't a typical success story. It's messy, full of failures, and took way longer than I thought it would. But I wouldn't change a thing. A little background. I grew up in a small town where opportunities were limited. I wasn't the most academic kid, but I had a knack for figuring things out, whether it was taking apart my old video game console or finding ways to make money, even if it was just mowing lawns or selling candy at school. I was always the one with some side hustle going on. I didn't realize it at the time, but those small jobs were teaching me about the grind, about seeing opportunities where others saw none. When I graduated high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. The whole go to college and get a degree thing didn't appeal to me at all, but I also knew I didn't want to end up stuck in a minimum wage job forever. I had no family money to rely on, and the thought of taking on student loans felt like a trap. So, I moved to a bigger city and got a job at a local tech company as a junior support technician. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I learned a lot on the job, way more than I thought I would. Every time I got a problem solved, I felt this rush of satisfaction. I also got to know a lot of people who worked in other departments, especially those who were more technical. Over time, I started teaching myself programming in the evenings. I'd stay up late, watching tutorials and writing simple scripts, building small projects just for fun. A couple of years passed, and I was doing well enough to move into a higher-paying role. But there was something itching at me, the desire to create something of my own. I was tired of working for someone else and making them money while I was still living paycheck to paycheck. I wanted to take all the skills I had accumulated and build something that was mine, something that had the potential to scale. I'll admit, I didn't have a clear plan when I started, but I had an idea. This was around 2014, and everyone seemed to be talking about e-commerce. Dropshipping was becoming a big thing, and I figured, why not try it? I had no idea what I was doing, but I spent the next few months learning everything I could about online stores, marketing, and finding products to sell. I launched my first store on Shopify, selling custom phone cases. I did everything from building the website to running Facebook ads. I thought it would be easy. I mean, people sell things online all the time, right? But the reality hit hard. I spent hundreds of dollars on ads that didn't convert, and I was barely making any sales. The few orders I did get didn't even cover my advertising costs. The store sat there for months, draining my bank account and leaving me frustrated. After a few months of failure, I almost gave up. But then I remembered what I always told myself, don't quit. I wasn't about to let a few setbacks stop me. So, I went back to the drawing board. I dug deeper into marketing strategies, learned about conversion rates, and started experimenting with new products. This time, I focused on finding a niche. Instead of selling general phone accessories, I zeroed in on a specific market, eco-friendly phone cases. It wasn't an overnight success, but after a few months of tweaking my ads, finding the right suppliers, and improving my website, things finally started to click. My sales began to grow slowly, and I was finally able to make a profit. I remember the first time I made $1,000 in a day. It felt surreal, like all my hard work was finally paying off. But just as I was starting to feel like I was getting the hang of things, life threw me another curveball. The supplier I had been working with dropped off the face of the earth, leaving me with hundreds of orders to fulfill and no way to get the products. My heart sank. I had to refund a ton of customers, and I was on the verge of losing everything. At that point, I felt completely defeated. I could have quit, but I didn't. I started searching for other suppliers, even if it meant taking a hit on the product margins. I had to pivot quickly and work harder than ever. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my supplier relationships, and this time I was more careful about who I partnered with. That experience taught me how important it is to build solid relationships with your suppliers and always have a backup plan. Over the next couple of years, my business grew steadily. I expanded my product line, hired a small team, and even began outsourcing tasks like customer service and fulfillment. But just when things seemed to be going smoothly, the market began to shift. More and more competitors were jumping into the eco-friendly niche, and the Facebook ads that had been working so well were becoming oversaturated. My cost per acquisition, CPA, started rising, and profits started shrinking. I realized that if I wanted to stay ahead, I needed to innovate. That's when I started focusing on building my brand. I began creating content around sustainability and eco-friendly living, partnering with influencers who aligned with my values. I launched an email marketing campaign that provided value to my customers beyond just selling them products. The focus shifted from buy this phone case to join the movement of conscious consumers. It worked. Sales didn't just recover, they skyrocketed. My brand became something people could identify with, not just a place to buy a product. We were making a real impact on the environment, and customers were responding to that message. By 2019, my store was generating 7 figures in revenue, and I had completely quit my job to focus on my business full-time. But as the years went on, I learned a hard lesson: success isn't just about the numbers. In 2021, I hit a major roadblock. I had gotten so caught up in scaling that I neglected the mental and emotional toll the business was taking on me. I was constantly stressed, overwhelmed, and burnt out. I had to take a step back and reevaluate what I was doing. So, I took a break. I spent time with family, focused on self-care, and reconnected with the original reason I started this journey: to create something meaningful and sustainable, not just in business, but in my life. Now, as I look back on everything, I realize that the journey hasn't been easy. It's been filled with ups and downs, failures and successes, but it's been worth it. I've learned that being an entrepreneur isn't just about making money. It's about solving problems, building relationships, and constantly evolving. And while the financial success is great, the personal growth has been even more rewarding. So, to anyone reading this who's thinking of starting their own business, here's my advice: it's going to be hard. There will be moments when you feel like giving up. But if you're persistent, adaptable, and willing to learn from your mistakes, you can make it. Just don't expect things to happen overnight. And most importantly, take care of yourself along the way. Because in the end, it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. This is the story of how I went from barely scraping by to building a 6-figure business. It wasn't a smooth ride, but it was a lesson in perseverance, learning from failure, and eventually trusting myself when no one else did. A few years ago, I was a 25-year-old guy working a mediocre job in a cubicle. I had no real passion for it, and I knew I was wasting my potential. At the same time, I had this little side project, a blog about tech gadgets. It started off as a hobby, something I did to share my thoughts on the gadgets I was buying and using. But as I started writing more, I began seeing some traction. People were reading my posts, commenting, and engaging with the content. I felt a spark of excitement, something that I hadn't felt in my full-time job for years. At first, it didn't seem like much. I barely made a few bucks here and there from affiliate links and ads on the site. But as time went on, I started seeing that there could be potential. The blog was growing, and the more I researched, the more I realized there was an entire community of people making money through niche blogs. The idea that I could make a living from something I was passionate about kept running through my mind. After about 6 months of working at the same job while running the blog on the side, I decided to take the plunge. I quit my job. Yes, I had no backup plan, no savings to cushion the blow, and no formal training in business. But I had the drive and the belief that I could make it work. The blog was starting to earn a couple of $1,000s a month, but I knew that wasn't enough to live on. I needed to scale up fast. I spent every waking moment working on the blog, writing articles, doing SEO, reaching out to companies for partnerships, and figuring out how to optimize my content for more traffic. It was exhausting, but I was determined. There were plenty of nights I stayed up late, barely able to keep my eyes open, working until 3 a.m. just to get the next post live. I'd then get up at 8 a.m., exhausted, to start the cycle all over again. The first few months after quitting my job were tough. I was eating ramen noodles for most of my meals, living on a shoestring budget, and trying to keep my morale up as I saw other people around me making steady paychecks. But in the midst of that struggle, I began seeing real growth. My traffic numbers were increasing steadily, and the ad revenue from my site started to climb. A big breakthrough came when I landed a major tech brand as a sponsor for one of my reviews. That single deal brought in more money than I had made the entire previous year. It was a game changer. With this newfound revenue, I hired my first freelancer, a writer who helped me scale my content production. The blog grew faster than I had anticipated, and I started bringing in more money than I ever had at my old job. But I didn't stop there. I knew I needed to diversify my income streams to avoid putting all my eggs in one basket. I began creating digital products, ebooks, guides, and courses. These products sold well because they were highly targeted to my audience. People wanted to know more about tech gadgets, and I could teach them how to get the most out of their products. The business continued to grow rapidly, but I still made plenty of mistakes along the way. I didn't know much about managing a team or finances. There was one point when I nearly went broke trying to hire too many people at once, thinking that scaling faster would guarantee success. In reality, it just created a huge cash burn. I had to backtrack and hire fewer people, but only after realizing that growth isn't always about hiring more. It's about optimizing what you already have. Looking back, the biggest challenge I faced wasn't technical or financial, it was mental. I constantly battled with self-doubt. Even though I was achieving success, there were days when I thought I was just faking it. There were moments when I look at my competitors and think, why am I not where they are? What am I doing wrong? I often wondered if I should just go back to a regular job, but that would have been admitting defeat. It was during these tough moments when I had to remind myself why I started in the first place, because I wanted freedom, I wanted to build something of my own, and most importantly, I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. One of the best decisions I made during this time was investing in learning. I took online courses on marketing, business management, and even psychology. I read books on entrepreneurship, personal growth, and leadership. These weren't just academic resources, they were tools that gave me a framework for understanding the world I was entering. They taught me not only how to run a business, but also how to become a better leader and decision maker. Fast forward to now, and the blog has turned into a full-fledged business. We have a small team, we generate multiple income streams, and I'm consistently hitting 6 figures in revenue. I have full control over my schedule and my life, which was the dream when I first started this journey. It hasn't been easy, and it still isn't. There are always new challenges to overcome, but I've learned that each obstacle is an opportunity to grow. I don't want to sugarcoat things. Building a business from scratch is hard. It's incredibly hard. There were days when I felt like giving up, and there were months where I wasn't sure if I would make it. But the one thing that kept me going was the belief that I could build something better. If you're in a similar situation, wondering if you should take that leap, here's my advice. Do it. But do it smartly. Don't expect instant success, and don't be afraid of failure. Failure is just another part of the learning process. If I could go back and give my 25-year-old self one piece of advice, it would be this. Trust yourself, keep learning, and don't let fear dictate your actions. Building a business is a marathon, not a sprint, and the road ahead will always be filled with obstacles. But if you keep pushing forward, you'll eventually get to where you want to be. I used to sell weed. Now I run a legitimate multi-million-dollar logistics company. And it all started with a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. This story might sound like a Netflix pitch, but I promise you, it's true. I grew up in a not-so-great part of Missouri. My mom worked double shifts, my dad wasn't around, and by 16, I was basically fending for myself. School was a formality. I barely passed classes, not because I wasn't smart, but because I was bored. My real education came from watching how people moved money. At 17, I started running small errands for a local dealer. Weed, mostly, sometimes pills. I wasn't proud of it, but it paid better than any fast food job. I was careful. I never used, never stayed in one spot too long, and never told anyone more than they needed to know. I saved every dollar I made. No flashy clothes, no parties. Just saving and observing. By 21, I'd outgrown the people I was working for. I started buying direct from growers in Colorado and driving the product back to Missouri. I knew every back road, every small-town diner to stop, and that wouldn't draw attention. I didn't see it as crime. I saw it as logistics. The turning point came during one of these runs. Somewhere outside of Hays, Kansas, I blew a tire. I had a trunk full of product, a half-dead burner phone, and a decision to make. There was no signal, no help, so I flagged down a trucker. That man, Rick, saved my life in more ways than one. He didn't ask too many questions, helped me swap my tire, and gave me a ride to the nearest tire shop while I left my car hidden down the road. During that 2-hour drive, he talked about the logistics industry, how goods move, warehouses, supply chains. I sat quietly and listened. Something clicked. After I finished that drop, I made the biggest decision of my life. I quit. I sold my car, cut ties with everyone in that world, and used my savings, about $28,000, to move to Kansas City. I rented a room above a bar, got a job at a warehouse unloading trucks, and kept my head down. Every break, I asked the older guys questions. How shipping works, What routes make the most money? Why companies pay out the nose for expedited delivery? I was back in school, this time voluntarily. 9 months later, I had a plan. I used my remaining money to buy a used box truck from an estate sale. I got my DOT license, registered a sole proprietorship, and started cold calling companies that needed same-day delivery in Missouri and Kansas. My pitch was simple. I'll get your freight where it needs to go faster and cheaper than the big guys. No excuses. The first month, I made $3,000. The next, $4,200. Then $6,000. I drove 16 hours a day. I learned how to manage time zones, optimize routes, and track fuel usage to the penny. I documented everything in a battered notebook. My margins were razor thin, but I was building something real. After a year, I bought a second truck and hired a guy I trusted from the warehouse. It wasn't all smooth sailing. One December, both trucks broke down in the same week. I maxed out a credit card and spent Christmas in a motel trying to source used parts from Craigslist. But I didn't quit. That year, we grossed $180,000. By the next, it was over $500,000. I rebranded as Aerofreight Logistics. The name was inspired by a tattoo Rick had on his forearm. Straight and forward, he told me. That stuck. I built the business one truck at a time. By year 5, I had 12 trucks, a small fleet of contracted drivers, and a dispatch system I helped design with a freelance coder. We were moving time-sensitive loads for medical suppliers, aerospace parts, and even emergency FEMA shipments during tornado season. In year 6, I landed a government subcontract for expedited medical deliveries across 3 states. That contract changed my life. We scaled to 40 trucks in under 18 months, hired a real operations manager, and moved into a leased warehouse. I never took outside investment. I never hired anyone I wouldn't trust to hold my wallet. I paid better than average and promoted from within. Some of the guys from my old warehouse job, they now manage regional teams. One of them bought his first house last year. Last year, Aerofreight hit $8.2 million in revenue. I take a modest salary and live in a 2-bedroom house with my dog and girlfriend. I drive a 2017 F-150 and still do unannounced ride-alongs with new drivers. Not to micromanage, but because I love the road. The irony isn't lost on me. I used to drive contraband. Now I drive compliance. I've never publicly told the full story. I used to be afraid people would judge me. But I think the lesson is worth sharing. Your past doesn't define you, but it can prepare you. I learned more about supply chains running a legal product than I ever did in school. I just had to redirect that knowledge. If you're reading this and you're in a place where your skills are non-traditional, take inventory. Hustle is hustle. Logistics, operations, negotiation, risk management. Those things exist in every world, legal or not. The key is knowing when to pivot. Rick passed away 2 years ago. I tried to find his family, but he was a loner. I named one of my trucks Old Rick in his honor. Sometimes I still take it out for short hauls. He once said, "A man with a map and a motor can go anywhere." I guess he was right. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.